Okay, it says we're live. Welcome to the party. Hello, Bill. Hello, Jenny. Hello, audience.
Hey, Robin.
Hello.
We're so excited to be here for our Data Fundamentals Unpacked. And this topic today is one of my most favorite, common sense. So welcome if you're joining us. We're super excited to be here. I'll moderate a little bit until Bill Shander kicks off. He's usually our amazing moderator. Really, the very first thing is, what is common sense? And Bill, what's your thoughts on what common sense is?
Well, it's funny, we talk about these things ahead of time, and we have our own little speaker's brief where we gather our thoughts. And it's funny, Ginny, when we were right before we joined just now, mentioned her technique, which I'll let her explain. But one of my techniques is also just to let's just define terms. So common sense, easy to define because you have two words. Common means like something that everybody or just about everybody shares, right? Truly common amongst people. And of course, sense can mean a whole bunch of different things. In this context, it's about, judgment. It's about, clarity. It's about, our understanding of whatever context we're in. And so the words are clear. And of course, when we think of that term, I guess it is common sense. It's just like, it's the duh stuff, right? Like, I know this, you know this, we all know this stuff. Duh, of course. And so in data, obviously we'll talk more about that specifically, but common sense is just everybody knows it. So it's almost like background noise. It's just like the known stuff. So that's an initial thought of definitions, maybe too broad in a way.
Guess it just depends. Jenny, what's your thoughts on common sense?
So I sort of take a different approach when it's something like this. I look for definitions, but I also look for quotes, what people who've had something to say about common sense have to say. And I think what I liked the most was Robert Sternberg, who's a psychologist, who says that common sense is the ability to solve real world problems. He talks about common sense as being practical intelligence, which makes sense to me. Because sometimes when I think somebody lacks common sense, it's because they clearly didn't pass a physics course or ever take one. It's like, yes, water still runs downhill. Why did you expect a different outcome there? But I found some other quotes that I enjoyed about common sense, so I'll share three of those. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was an author and a theologian, said, "Common sense is genius dressed in its working clothes."
That's a great one.
That feels good.
Really good one.
Albert Einstein said, "Common sense is the collection of prejudices you have acquired by age 18.
That's very specific.
Something must have happened to him at 18.
Yeah.
Maybe that's.
And I wonder if he wrote this when he was 20 or when he was 70.
At what point? Interesting.
When he was 18. He thought he was all fully baked. But I think my favorite is from the author Isabel Allende, who says, "Nice people with common sense do not make interesting characters. They only make good former spouses." So she clearly was not all that tied to common sense as being something, at least that she was looking for in a spouse that she'd keep.
Yeah, interesting. So I looked it up on Oxford Dictionary because I love to look at the classical definitions, and it says good sense and sound judgment in practical matters, a common sense approach. And that's how Oxford Dictionary defines it. My dad, however, defines it as getting out of the rain sense. Like you got sense enough to get out of the rain. And I love common sense because I'm full of it, according to my family, friends, and colleagues. And I think that practical approach is what gets me every time. I usually start with my common sense before any of the book sense kind of kicks in. And that was another question on our speaker's brief is, do you need common sense in data, or is book sense enough? So who wants to tackle that one?
I mean, I can certainly go, and I have to also circle back on what we talked about just now, which is that, you both use the word and you said it twice, Robin, practicality. And so, Ginny, I think maybe the first quote mentioned practicality. And then you also had it's the in the work close, which is about practicality. And, so common sense is about, I think it's a great sort of word to think about. And it's practical to get out of the rain. That's why we get out of the rain. It just makes sense. You may have, some sort of reason why getting wet today is a good idea, but it just makes sense. Practically, you're going to get out of the rain, of course. But as far as common sense versus book sense, as I said in the speaker's brief, that my answer to that was in all caps. I said abso-freaking-lutely. And we've talked about this a little bit before in one of our other sessions here, and I can't remember what the topic was for that day. But we've talked about the idea that, you can have all the book smarts in the world. You can study, all these statistical, facts and, data analytics techniques and all the rest of it. But you got to know what you're doing. Maybe it was when we were talking about data literacy, but I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? So yes, you need to learn stuff. You need to have specific skills. You need to know certain things. And it's on a spectrum, because if you know this much, you can be a data scientist. If you know this much, you can be a junior data analyst, et cetera. But I don't care whether you're a data scientist or a data analyst. If you don't have common sense, you're going to be terrible at your job. And both the common sense in data, in the work that you're doing, and of course, common sense just in the world. Are you a good colleague? Do you know how to, treat your bosses and your reports well, and all those other things, which are also sort of related to common sense. So yes, is the short answer to your question.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting, because you will, if you don't have common sense, but you do have all the book sense, and then you come back with purely numbers, and even though you used correct methods, you used best practices, if you bring something that's weird to your boss, they're going to look at you like, how did you not know that? And you used proper methods to get there, but something was off and you didn't catch it. So I think you got to have a healthy dose of common sense. And Jenny had a great answer to this question, which I definitely related to. Why don't you tell us your thoughts on
a great but short answer? Short answer, which is that while common sense alone is not enough to let you validate results, if you don't have common sense, you won't be able to validate results, particularly in an endeavor, project, or a field that you don't know much about.
Absolutely. Or as Bill would say, abso-freaking-lutely. He really did write that in the speaker's brief in all caps and dashes.
When I'm being polite, that's how I say it.
I like it.
What's funny is that, you talk about using the proper methods in data, and we're also talking about how common sense is what tells you to validate. And of course, the proper methods include data validation and all these smart things you need to do to make sure that what you're doing is right. And so really, data analytics has common sense built into it, right? We know, I mean, the way I tend to phrase it is like, you need to be paranoid. Like, you have to assume everything is wrong. And in data analytics, you're taught, well, do this, this, and this in terms of data cleaning and data validation and checking for accuracy and thinking about things like sample size and all these other things you worry about. Common sense is remembering to worry about them. Common sense is the thing that lets you know, all right, so I'm doing data validation. I've done this thing, and it's a survey about preferred ice cream flavors. How big of a sample size do I really need to trust my results enough? Well, probably pretty small. No, it's a vaccine safety trial. Okay, well, maybe in that case, common sense should tell me I probably need that sample size to be much, much, much larger. And so it's techniques, it's common sense, and it's the blending of the two, which is so important and interesting.
Yeah. Well, when I read Jenny's comment to this question, it really kind of rang true to me, because I think common sense definitely helps you to validate your results. And just to give some practical type of examples that are related to data, if the company revenues are around, 3 million annually, give or take a couple 100,000, and then all of a sudden you see 9 million and nothing surrounding you has changed, common sense says maybe something needs to be checked there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't have a record 3 times year, but knowing that doesn't look right, that little feeling of intuition that something may be off here, to me, that's where common sense really kicks in. The other thing is you got a group of people dedicated to a particular process. Like there's 25 people that are dedicated to the sales process, and then you're running reports or scenarios where only 5 of them show up. Like my instinct is, where are the other 20 people, right? And so I think when Jenny mentioned that common sense is not enough by itself, but it does help us validate, it really rang true for me, because I'm looking for those things. And usually when I start up a project, I'm trying to identify up front things that will help me trigger my common sense. Like, what are your annual revenues? About how many people work on this process? So definitely think that like learning how to ask good questions will help build the type of common sense triggers that occur. And I really would love to believe that these have been happening for me throughout my whole career, but I'm pretty positive that the more experience we gain, the more we build that common sense muscle. If you have common sense, I think you can build and add to it through experience. All right, so here's the next big question. If you struggle with common sense, what do you do? Any thoughts on this? I've got some, but I'll save mine. Jenny, what's your thoughts on if you don't have common sense?
Well, I kind of like one piece of Einstein's, which is the 18 years old, because common sense is something that's acquired through life experience. And so, you know, when we see somebody do something that seems not to make sense and indeed leads to a less than stellar outcome for them, you know, we tend to say, you know, don't you have any common sense at all? And if you're saying that to a 10-year-old, the answer would be probably less than an 18-year-old, because you gain common sense through experience with the world. But I think that when I look at people that I have known or know who would seem to lack common sense, it feels often to me that they're folks who don't really think about context in their decision making. You know, that they want to make a decision and be done, whatever the decision is, and that it seems to me that they often have a sense of urgency. And the part of what the common sense piece that seems to be not there is being able to decide, is this a decision I even have to make now? You know, there's like a decision pressure that they're responding to. And, you know, maybe they had a month to make the decision, but they want it gone. I'm sure that there's a Myers-Briggs type for people who just want it decided, and they don't really. And then afterwards, it's like, that was not a good decision. But I actually have friends who are able to make wrong decisions with an alarming frequency. And you know, and to me, it's like, slow down, you know, ask yourself, do I have to decide this now? Or ask yourself, do I even know enough to make this decision?
Yeah, that's a good
right?
one. Do I know enough to make those decisions?
Because, right? Because common sense would tell me that I really don't know enough about nuclear physics to have an opinion about what we should do with, you know, Chernobyl right now.
Yeah.
You know, common sense would tell me that. And that if I needed to make that decision, I would have a lifetime of stuff to learn first. That's an outrageous example, but still there's a piece of making decisions with the data you have when the data is insufficient, making decisions quickly when you could have had time. So I think there could be a practice. One of the things that I looked at is that actually common sense is something that psychologists all wish someone else would study. Like psychologists wish other psychologists would study common sense, and nobody appears to really be doing it. Like how we acquire common sense, so the reason that we don't have a great answer for how do you develop more common sense is we have either common sense answers that are our own and we're kind of proud of it, or, you know, we would look to the field of research. But it's a a almost unresearched field, the acquisition and growth of common sense.
That's interesting. There's so little that we actually know about the brain that doesn't shock me at all. I see Oz is on our feed here, and I feel like Oz is chock full of common sense, and I'm pretty positive all of his followers love his practical application of everything he teaches. So I thought I would shout out Oz here on our feed. So Bill, when we ask you this question, like, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, so it's funny, in the speaker's brief, my first reaction to that question was, oof, I have no idea. Like, how do you develop common sense when you don't have common sense? But what's interesting is that when I'm listening to you two both speak, again, I always circle back to keywords I'm hearing. First of all, the word experience. You have to have experience. 1 + 1 = 2. That's common sense. We all know that. We know to get out of the rain. Why do we know to get out of the rain? Because we've experienced rain. Mm-hmm. I sat in the rain one time and it was kind of cool out and I found myself shivering and feeling really uncomfortable. So I got out of the rain. And that happened over the first month, year, decade of my life. Now it's like really common sense to me, and we all know that.
Yeah.
So we experienced that problem. Robin, you also used the word intuition. Mm-hmm. Okay, so sometimes we just know. We don't know why we know, but we just know, and we do have to trust our gut. So we're data people. We trust the data, but we do also have to trust our gut. And especially I love the word you used, to trigger our thinking about, something doesn't smell right here. I'm going to look into it. Then I heard the word context. I think Ginny used that word. Mm-hmm. And we have to, in other words, pay attention to the context. We have to pay attention to the world around us. To your example, Robin, this company made $3 million in sales for the last 40 years. All of a sudden it's 9. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It means I got to notice it, be aware of it, then I'm going to look into it. And so common sense is something that does evolve. It does develop. It is about knowing more about our context, having more experiences and all those things. Now, the learning to trust our gut part, some people just suck at that. I don't know how you develop that part of it. Yeah. But it's almost, it's learning to, it's actually funny. My wife is going through a process right now where she's focusing a lot on like meditation and personal growth. And, the phrase that's used all the time is, becoming more aware, right? Living in awareness and, meditation to live in the now, And so I'm also training for a marathon. And like one of the things I'm doing is every time I'm in pain, I'm like, focus on the now, focus on the now. It doesn't feel that bad right now. Forget about 5 miles from now. And so developing that ability to be in the moment, mm-hmm. also with the context and the experience that you have, and just letting that trigger occur. I don't know how you develop it except by just doing more of it. And I know this is a long answer, but I have more to say. In data validation and data cleaning, what do we do? When I teach data cleaning to my students, I always talk about it being in 2 parts. There are 2 key components of it, no matter what step in data cleaning you're in. The first step is to notice the problem. I notice there's an accuracy issue. I notice that there's a weird number over here. I notice. Yeah, then I got to figure out what to do about it, part 2. Mm-hmm. But the noticing it comes first. And so that's sort of common sense, and it could be intuition, experience, all those other things. But notice it, then you can worry about what to do about it. So be in that moment where you notice it, and you're halfway there towards then a common sense goal approach. Whew, that was a long answer. Much longer than I expected. It was like my shortest answer in the speaker's brief, but I think my longest answer maybe.
I like it. Well, and I'll just kind of go off a little bit with that when you're talking about validation and the 2 parts of the data cleaning, seeing what you got, figuring out what it's telling you, figuring out if it can answer the questions you've been tasked to answer. I know I do this with our research team. We develop these data sets and then they go and study them and then they come back. And if even a little thing is off or a little thing triggers them to make them go, I'm not sure. My immediate response is, I'm going to go back and recheck everything. I'm going to go check it again because we can introduce coding errors, or we just need to confirm we didn't introduce a coding error. when I started my career, I wasn't thinking about that. And when you practice methods that are trusted and true, it's real easy to think, well, I got this. I trust nothing, to your earlier point. Like, even if I've created it, I don't trust it. I brute force test it. I make other people peer review it. We don't publish it until we know. Like, and these are things that I definitely learned over time. I get tickled because I have teenagers, and I really related to Jenny's response that, we're often facing younger people talking about common sense. And my best suggestion is, when you don't have a lot of common sense, or you haven't grown that muscle yet, or you hadn't quite figured it out, focus on critical thinking, because critical thinking can be easily learned. You can practice it. It is practical. So even though common sense is natural to me, even though I've grown it over time, critical thinking can be practiced. And then common sense and critical thinking together makes them for real dynamic problem solving, validation. And because I have teenagers, I'm typically not saying, okay, use some common sense, kids. I'm usually saying, all right, did you think that through? Where is the critical thinking? There's this really great course by Mike Figlio I'm going to make you watch on LinkedIn Learning. So I focus on my kids' critical thinking, because maybe they haven't had enough life experience yet to gain all the common sense they're going to need for what they're going to be doing. So interesting.
It's interesting too, because the implication that you get more common sense as you age also aligns perfectly with the idea that the older you get, the less you realize you know. And so we get more common sense, and part of that is learning that we don't know everything. And in fact, we know less and less of the totality that there is to know. We do learn. I know more and more as I get older, but boy, I realize that the proportional share of what I know of the universe of knowledge just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And it's common sense to know that, on its own.
Yeah. Oh, that is really,
that's sad.
That's really, yeah.
Actually, it's funny. Jeb asked a good question. Do people know if they don't have common sense? Like, that's a good question. I don't know.
Sometimes parents and friends.
Sometimes, yes, because some of the people that I said, I have friends that don't have common sense, they will tell you they don't have common sense. They'll go,
oh, really?
I don't have any common sense at all. And then, so at least some people are either self-aware, or they've been told so many times that they believe it, or maybe they were always told that as kids and they just never developed something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's another possibility too. It's like the huge number of kids who were told in elementary school and junior high that they can't sing, so they quit singing. That doesn't mean they can't sing. It just means they were strongly discouraged and they believed it. So
yeah,
it might be that there are people who have good common sense who believe they don't. But often when I'm having an argument or a discussion with someone who lacks common sense, they are totally unaware of that. They actually think they're geniuses. So, so it's not that everyone who doesn't have common sense, I don't think everyone is a good analyst about their own level of common sense necessarily.
Yeah. It's sort of like
also
relating your skill. Like, how do you judge your skills? Like, we'll ask people when we get ready to do Excel training, like, how do you feel about your Excel skills? Like, where do you feel like you're at on the spectrum of Excel skills? And, if you don't say, compare them to my Excel skills, who are they using as a comparison point? How do you do that? I think common sense is probably the same thing. How do you actually measure common sense?
Yeah. And of course, common sense is on its own very contextual, because common sense in data, if you are a data scientist among data scientists, what their common sense is for them is very different from common sense from, like we were talking about, a 10-year-old, but even among another professional. But let's say
like surgeons.
Right.
Oh, right? Yeah. Real.
Yeah.
Interesting. So there's a range.
Common. Yeah. So common sense is all about context, and that's why, essentially, I wrote a post about this today on a sort of a slightly different topic, but it's about common sense, but it was focusing on communicating data with an audience. And the thesis is there's actually no such thing as common sense. There is no common. We all have different levels of understanding based on the context, based on the subject, based on all these different things. And so unless you're in a very narrow niche, I'm communicating data with data scientists. We do share a common sense understanding of every single thing I'm talking about. For the most part, you don't have that. You have a very diverse audience. And therefore, no matter what you're doing, you have to assume your audience, there is no common, or there's some baseline level of common, 1 + 1 = 2. But beyond that, you have to really think about what they actually do or don't know, what context they do or don't have, and be careful about, really thinking it through and using your own common sense to realize what they may or may not know, and providing that guidance and contextual information so that they can understand what you're talking about.
And there's a lot, like I was seeing the comments pop up here, there's a lot who are saying there's no such thing as common sense. And, there's all these different things in our feed here. And it is an interesting, this is why we're talking about it, because it is such an interesting topic. But I, again, think a common sense approach when you're communicating data is understanding, just like you said in that article, that if you're presenting to a certain group who shares the same skills as you, there's some commonality that they're going to understand. But if you're presenting something and you are the only person who really knows the intricate details of it, you have to think through the way you're going to pass that information over to people for them to understand. It takes a lot to really consider your audience and think about your audience. And again, is that common sense? Is that experience? Is it just being practical? Like, to me, it's practical to consider. About to present this to a bunch of stats people. They're going to have a certain understanding. Totally different. I'm about to present this to a group of people who are in the process of becoming more data literate. I'm going to have two different deliveries of the same topic. To me, that, I don't know if that's as much common sense as just practicality. At the end of the day, I need both groups to understand what I'm talking about, because if they don't, I don't have a path forward.
Yeah.
Like, if they're not understanding me, what do I do next? And so, yeah, I really loved that post this morning, and I just thought it was a interesting twist on what we were talking about today. Because again, we're talking about common sense, but then as data professionals, we have a very uncommon sense. I just thought that was really, really impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another really good question in the comments, which is, can AI be taught common sense? I love that question, because I think that obviously the answer is yes and no. My common sense tells me so, meaning that you can't teach a machine common sense. Common sense is just that intuitive knowing that we humans could possibly have, of course, right? But at the same time, I would argue that machine learning is by definition actually 100% pure common sense. Like, the machine is looking through infinite data records, and it's telling us what's common. It's telling us what actually is that thing that is the truth. If the pattern looks like this and the pixels look like that, it's a cat face. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And, so the machine is actually better at common sense than we are, I'm going to say controversially. I have no idea. So, it's a really interesting question. I don't know what you both think.
Well, I think common sense would tell us machine learning doesn't solve every problem.
Also true.
Okay. So, but I mean, I'm into the whole, it's a cat face. That's kind of fun. I like that scenario. Jenny, what's your thoughts?
Well, that's the whole field of reinforcement learning, is actually being able to help machines learn in such a way that within a specific context, they can deliver optimal results, right? For optimal rewards. And you can't do that without being able to check some of the things that we would like refer to as common sense. for the folks who say there's no common sense, well, is there such a thing as practical intelligence, or not? I think in terms of whether there's common sense or not, it was some kind of the fun that I had with the quotes is that it's that common sense represents something. It's shorthand for something else, and to me, the idea of practical intelligence within a particular context, well, that's what reinforcement learning is supposed to be doing. And one of the cool things is that machines and people don't learn that differently, right? We learn a lot about how humans learn from all of the work that's being done on how machines learn. So perhaps we'll back our way into knowing some additional things. But it's all within a context. When my context changes dramatically, what is common sense, doesn't necessarily hold any longer. So there's practical intelligence that's context aware.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm fascinated by this topic. And again, I'm going back to something that Bill said earlier about picking up some of the key words. And again, experience is really playing a factor into probably a lot of the things that we're teaching people, which may seem like common sense to us, but the very first time they're hearing it, it may be, groundbreaking information that, they implement immediately. And then it's really not common sense for them. It's a practice. Probably most specifically this past week, I spent some time preparing because Innovate Birmingham's getting ready to do their demo day. And these people are presenting technical information on a screen. And because I've been a technical presenter for 20 years, I know that if you show a screen to a group of people and you don't tell them physically where to look while you're talking, they're looking everywhere trying to consume that information and then find the spot to be. So common sense tells me, tell them where to look. And that's a practice I've been teaching to others so that they would know, okay, let me just get ahead of that. And again, that goes, is it common sense or is it experience? I don't know. At some point I realized they're trying to figure out where I'm at. And then I implemented that into my everyday practice. Okay, everybody look on the top left, go ahead and look on the bottom right to kind of draw focus to where we're going. So it's really, really interesting. Now I'm wondering how much common sense really does exist. I still do believe it exists.
Yeah, I think it almost does come down to that common sense is only experience. It is context. There's no real common sense that you're born knowing things. I mean, some people could argue that, whatever. So it's by definition more likely to be more about experience, context, and all those things, which, by the way, if we bring those two ideas together, so, Ginny, you said machine learning can't solve all of our problems. Why is that? Because we can feed the machine an infinite amount of data. Well, we know the answer why, because we're also the ones writing the code, creating the algorithms, feeding it, deciding what information gets fed to it. It's not literally infinite. And so bias, which we also talked about, right, recently, or did we talk about bias yet?
Coming up.
I can't remember. Either way, we're talking about bias, and we've talked about that tangentially a bunch of other times before. But common sense is biased, right? Common sense is influenced by our experience, by our context. So for instance, there was a time when it was common sense that the earth was flat. Of course, if you go too far out in a boat, you're going to fall off the edge, right? It was also common sense that, of course, the earth is the center of the universe. Then we learned stuff and we had new measurement techniques and we thought more deeply, blah, blah, blah. And now suddenly common sense is something new. And so, common sense evolves, which means there is no common sense.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's a thought.
I don't know.
I'm not quite buying it yet. But,
I'm not sure. Yeah.
but I'll sit with it. But one of the reasons that we can't simply rely on machines to make our choices based on us having fed them a bunch of data, we have an algorithm, we'll feed it infinite amounts of data and it will learn, but it may not learn what we want it to. And so there's the example of in terms of recognition, trying to train an application, an algorithm to know the difference and be able to identify from photographs dogs versus wolves. Okay, turns out that the algorithm could learn very quickly the difference between a dog and a wolf, and was very good at predicting that's a dog and that's a wolf, until they did pictures of dogs in snow. Because what the algorithm had realized is, right, if there happens to be snow, it's probably a wolf. If it happens to be indoors, it's probably a dog. So we have an algorithm that was designed, right? The teaching is to teach the algorithm to tell the difference between dogs and wolves, but actually all it could do was accurately identify the absence or presence of snow, right? But there's stuff that goes to market that nobody figures that out. Do you see what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's 99.
Although, it's funny though. Here's what's funny.
What's funny?
Common sense would tell you if it's snow, it's a wolf. So, like in a way, that machine proved that it can learn common sense.
In a way, although if there's snow, it's probably a wolf. If it's indoors, it's almost never a wolf, right?
Right.
But the dog in the back, but a reindeer in snow would also similarly be identified as a wolf because of the presence.
Good point.
Right?
Good point.
So
I've been to Chicago with a friend walking a dog, and it was a dog, and it was clearly lots of snow.
Exactly. My neighbor's dogs, they're out in the snow. So, and there's lots of examples like that. Lots of examples where the idea of this is the meaning, right? This is the discernment we want you to be able to make. And so, no, I'm not quite ready, for example, to have AI determine what the wolf population is in my county, which is pretty low compared, but in the winter, they'd all be wolves, right?
Yeah.
So
in other words, common sense can be wrong. It can be wrong in machines, that proves. It can be wrong in humans, as flat Earth proved, although Flat Earth Society people may argue with us there. So then that brings up another question, which is, what do we do when common sense is wrong? And because that's a very common thing. And so, to that study, it made sense. Like, look, it did a perfect job identifying wolves versus dogs. It's perfect. It took common sense to be like, wait a second, maybe not. Okay, we've identified what's wrong. Now what do we do about it? And that's an easy one, because we can just sort of change the algorithm, realize the parameters that are different, and rejigger. But what do we do when our common sense is wrong when we're doing this type of work? What do y'all think?
I want to go back to something you said earlier, Bill, about how common sense is acquired, right? And something Robin said about context is invariably when our context changes dramatically, what made sense doesn't make sense anymore. So part of common sense is knowing that there are different contexts and what makes, and my favorite quote for this is, that there are business isms, jargonisms that go by, like at the end of the day and things like that you say, I wish people would quit saying that. For a long time, one place I worked was, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. So, like, you'd be trying to explain that there's something out here that doesn't seem right, and it might be this. And instead of saying, well, the KISS principle says, keep it simple, stupid. It's like, no, think horses, not zebras. That's because there's no zebras here. If you're standing in the middle of a reserve in Africa, that probably isn't quite as true. So when I carry my common sense from one place to another, it may serve me much less well. And I need to think about what's the common sense here. There's a huge piece of this that is cultural, right? A huge piece of this that is knowing my own limitations, in that I don't know this industry well, for example. And so what makes perfect sense to me, why are you doing that way? Or tell me more, are better questions than just assuming that my common sense makes more sense than the collective experience and practical intelligence that is common sense of the people that are there.
Wow, that really kind of triggers the idea of self-awareness in my mind. Like, I am very aware of the things that I should not talk about, like basketball. I know nothing about it.
Nothing.
My experience with hockey is that it's really fast. And if they don't put it on slow-mo, I'm never seeing what's happening. Like, so I'm very aware. Like, I enjoy watching it, but to have a conversation about it, I'm nowhere. Don't know the rules. You know, same thing. And that's pretty true for most sports. So, like, I had a friend tell me a long time ago, they were talking about basketball and they were having this really deep conversation, and I thought I would contribute. And he looked at me and was like, you know nothing about basketball. Don't talk about it. It's clear you know nothing about it. So I became accidentally very self-aware through shame of a friend to say, okay, hey, you don't really know anything about this. Don't jump in and contribute as if you do. Sometimes that hurts people's egos, though, when they're feeling like, here's my chance, here's my opportunity to show what I know and, you know, have a big win in this conversation. But I can assure you, you're probably not coming across how you hope. So when you're talking about that, I immediately thought self-awareness, and maybe that's a part of common sense, is just being self-aware.
So if you were offered an opportunity to do some data analysis for the NBA or the WNBA or
right on,
you know, right. So what are the first things then that you think about when here's this data job, you know, to be able, because there's a huge amount of statistical work that takes place.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well,
not just professional sports, but
yeah.
University, college level.
Yeah.
What do you need? What common sense? What does your common sense tell you about what you need to know?
Well, my common sense says we have a sports analytics group here in Birmingham at Samford, and they are renowned. So, and I have contacts over there. And I know data at the end of the day is just data. So what my real approach would be to learn the rules of what the engagement would be. What are the business rules, which that transcends any topic. What are the business rules? What are we trying to achieve? Let me see the data. Let me explore it. I would not let a lack of understanding hold me back, but I also would not oversell and act like I've been doing sports analytics for the last 20 years when I haven't been. Yeah.
You know, what's really interesting is that, you know, the whole idea of data analytics, even the way it's structured, how we're supposed to approach a project, in and of itself, in a way, encourages building common sense. So what's the first thing you do when you open up a data file? You know, maybe you sort some columns, you're looking for min max, and maybe you calculate some of those other summary statistics. Let me see what the average is. Let me see what the median is, you know, and so you're literally, let me orient myself and learn what's normal in this data set.
Yep.
Which gives you common sense, to your point, Robin, where, okay, suddenly it's a $9 million figure. The previous 20 years, I didn't see those kinds of numbers. So exploring the data and having that open mind, you know, builds common sense. And so we can both orient ourselves towards a project and build common sense by the things we typically do, hopefully, which also teaches us how we can build common sense. To the question from earlier, well, like, what if you have terrible common sense? What do you do about it? This is what you do about it. Like, you go and you explore. You have that curious mind. You learn stuff, which also brings up another really important point. So my entire career, I started out, I was trained as a journalist. I could never focus on one subject at a time. I could never be like an expert in any like industry like that. And so I've always been a very consultative person. And that's what my clients always liked about me. I would ask them 1,000 questions. Mm-hmm. And Robin, you mentioned this earlier, like, you know, tell me about your sales. How many salespeople do you have? What's the average sale per person per year? What's the biggest year you ever had? You're going to ask all these really good questions, not 8,000 of them, but probably 20 of them. They're going to give you all of that context, even if it's a brand new topic. I work with clients in a new industry at least once a year. Never worked in that industry before. I have no clue about it. I'll learn it to, you know, a little small degree.
Yeah.
And then I'm not stupid and I have common sense when I look at their data or whatever it is I'm looking at. So it's self-awareness, it's experience, it's context, those other keywords we've talked about. And it's also learning. It's exposing yourself to that stuff to build common sense. You can build some common sense pretty quickly. And to your point, also leaning on other people's common sense. So I don't know crap about this industry. I've done a very shallow dive. I've learned a tiny bit. And what I've learned is maybe I'll detect something that feels off, or my gut will tell me, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask my clients, is this number weird? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So I'm going to rely on their common sense, but I do have to have that trigger, that moment where I can sort of know to ask them if it's weird or not.
Yeah. I mean, to be frank, like every project you ever work on for the first time, you don't know anything close to what you will know after you accomplish the project successfully. And so again, learning practical application, learning best practices, understanding hard skills, those are parts of building that common sense of here's how you can handle or tackle. But I think if you hold yourself back because you don't understand every detail, that's unfortunate. I grew up with a mother who said, you can do anything. And I believed her. And so anything I put my mind to, I've done it. Has it been easy? Did I not have things I had to do along the way? Sure. But I don't let any amount of sense, book sense, common sense, practicality hold me back from anything. But I can also fall to my hard skills. I've got a strong dose of soft skills in regards to data, professionalism, being an executive, dealing with the executive. But I also have a full toolbox of hard skills, and all of those things coming together collectively, thrown in with the common sense I've gained through experience. Yeah, I think we could achieve anything if we put the time and invest in ourselves. So if you don't have common sense, you don't have book sense, or you're not sure where you are, just invest in yourself and pick up. We talk about different skills you need to have every episode. Just go pick one and focus on it. Again, mine would be critical thinking, past the technical hard skills. I don't know. I got excited there for a minute. Sorry.
You were all rubbed up. I did want to mention one other thing. One other way that one learns through projects is when projects aren't successful. When phases of a project aren't successful. I think some of my strongest learnings, the ones that serve me best are the times that things did not turn out as I would have wished they were. Eric Hartwig says, would you consider common sense to be a form of inductive reasoning based upon previous experiences or observations, or that sinking sense in your gut, right? Or the wanting to go in your office and close the door and turn off the light and pretend you're not even there. So I think that failure also is a good teacher and is a good builder of some part of our common sense, our common sense muscle, whatever it is.
Yes, take us to Data Church, Jenny.
I'm just saying.
We're at Data Church. Yes. Yes.
Well, and we had that as a topic of just.
Sorry, Bill. I think they look at us and think, wow, everything we've ever done has been just so wildly successful. And no, my biggest thing is if you're going to fail, do it fast and use it as an opportunity to learn, because you will get your most learning in those moments and your most growth, period. Anyway, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we actually had talked about that as a topic to discuss today. Let's share some examples. So, we've all had, I've personally never had a failure, of course. I've only had perfect success every time. But I'm sure you both have great stories to share of horrible, horrible failures. So yeah, maybe we can share some specific success stories where common sense saved the day, or, oh my God, this was a total disaster. Common sense failed us. And then probably what we learned about common sense from that failure. And I'll start where this was a very difficult moment in my career. Although it wasn't actually something I did wrong, but it was a really interesting learning experience where I was doing a project. I did a project that lasted 14 years, ridiculous, success story from that standpoint. I did a series of interactive experiences for the World Economic Forum, for Davos, the big annual meeting where all the rich people show up and decide our futures behind closed doors.
Okay.
And so it was this thing where it took the form of a series of data visualizations after many, many years. And at one point we created this map, pretty simple, map of the world. Okay, we just get a shape file, we turn it into a map, click on it, look at it, blah, 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 data. Well, what happened was, and this was in like mid 2000s, so I can't remember, or early 2000s even, I can't remember exactly what the issue was, but I'll tell you what happened was that the foreign minister, because, Davos, like presidents of countries and foreign ministers, secretaries of state type people show up. The foreign minister of this country, and I can't remember which country it was, showed up, and he looked at the map and he's like, good map, I like it. Foreign minister of Russia showed up, looked at the map and said, bad map, we're leaving. Literally, they walked out of Davos because the map, the border of one of the countries was over here instead of over here. So imagine, like in today's world, if Crimea was shown as part of Ukraine versus part of Russia, what kind of a conflict that could develop into.
Sure.
And so my common sense had told me, and I talked to my client and we all agreed, well, of course, we're going to use the UN map. We knew that this was an issue. Borders are always, sticky. But we said, we'll use the UN map. That's like the world standard. It probably even had a dotted line on it. It was probably like as good a map as you could possibly draw, that common sense, all of us could agree this is reasonable. But it wasn't common because there was, 5% of the world who thought it should be this way versus that way. Long story short, you can never win. So truly, there's no 100% agreement on anything. Common sense, that was the right choice, but the foreign minister of Russia left anyways. And so, I don't know exactly if that's exactly on topic here, but it's related. And I've had 1,000 worse failures. Of course, I was kidding before. But yeah, what about you two? Failures and our successes that can inform our great listeners here.
Well, I did. So this was a project I was associated with, but it wasn't my project. But an organization that was moving from a mainframe to PCs. So that tells you it was a little while ago. And one of the cool things was that they could use a spreadsheet to be able to create some really nice graphs, because before we had spreadsheets for charts, what we had were art departments.
Yeah, right.
Seriously. I mean, folks sent their reports out to have graphic artists return charts. So the exciting thing was that they could start doing more of their own charting in-house. And the team that was working on this came up with, at the time it was beautiful. Today it wouldn't quite be as beautiful, because we can do so much more, even more beautiful things with Excel than we could with Excel 5. Okay. But there was a series of charts about all of the expenses, and people were just looking at the charts and looking at the expenses changing over time. And everybody is all caught up in how good these look, because it's such a game changer when you can do some kind of visualization as opposed to just numbers in a report. Mm-hmm. And somebody walked up to the screen, to what was projected on the screen, and they looked like at the data labels, and they sat back down and said, here's the problem. If that's true, we went bankrupt last year.
Oof.
Okay. Because the expenses being illustrated were like 60% higher than the gross income.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But they looked really good, and it's easy.
It's very beautiful.
Right. And it's like, everybody's going to love these. And it's like, not really.
It's not the ones paying attention.
And the data that we had been, that the team had been given, downloaded from the mainframe, the DBA who had set it up had just made a mistake. And the mistake was that they were getting sales information from two different data sources and expenses from two different data sources. And they actually had duplicate entries in the expense side. They'd clean it up on the income side, but not the expense side. But there's like a common sense thing. Somebody just sits there and says, does that number even make sense?
How does that even work? Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah.
We went bankrupt last year. The opposite side when it doesn't work is when we believe too much in our common sense, sort of the common sense models. And I had shared this earlier that I have somebody I know who I really respect, who has done their whole lifetime really has been in high level financial work. Okay. And I asked them in 2007, I said, I look at the market right now. And by the way, we both served on a finance committee for an organization. So in this context, when we had millions of dollars in assets, I said, I look at the market right now and it feels really speculative and housing's going nuts and I don't get it. How close are we, or what's the possibility that the bottom could fall out of the market? And he looked right at me and he said, there's ups and there's downs, but this market can't fail. The housing market can't fail and the stock market can't fail. Okay. I get what you're thinking about, but you're thinking sort of old style. Now we have all of these, and he explains it all to me in very technical terms, and it made perfect sense to me. And that was good for about a year. Yeah. And then the bottom fell out of everything. And his common sense, which I trusted, right? Because he knows so much more than me. This is his context. He lives and breathes here. And yet the common sense, not only of my friend, but of so many other people was just wrong. It was just wrong.
Well, that makes the case. And this is, I say this to the people who work with us, and then also everybody I get an opportunity to train, is there's always more than what you are going to be privy to. And so you can only go so far before someone has to come in and share or not share, the information you don't have. I do have two little thoughts on common sense and where my dad learned about me being very practical, and where common sense won me a software development project that I'm super proud of. My dad was driving me around. I think it was in my early 20s. I hadn't figured out what I wanted to do in my life. And we were going to the grocery store, and he's like driving around like the parking lot, and he's trying to find a spot like right by the door. And he's expressing how he really wants a spot like right next to the door. And I'm like, hey, Dad, it really doesn't matter how close you get to the door. It's how close you get to the cart return. And he
I love that.
Looked at me like, where you been all my life? It's like he realized all of a sudden, okay, he hadn't completely failed with me. I just that was something that, and again, still like here we are, 20 plus years later, he will never forget that, and neither will I, because he looked at me different from that day forward. And then we were pursuing an opportunity, and in the process of pursuing that opportunity, we were trying to do process improvement. And I noticed that these people were walking in and out of their cubes, going to a printer every day. And I studied the traffic of them, the timing of them. I drew their cubes out, drew a model of what it looked like them going in and out of their cubes all day, and then predicted how much payroll money they would save if they stopped people from walking repeatedly through the day and just put a printer on their desk. That was just part of my research to go get the software. I don't think they ever made it past that point. They're like, if this is what you think about, then we'll have you design the software. Very practical. Don't know if it was common sense, but to me, it's like if you got 10 people walking out multiple times a day, well, you could save some time. You save time, you save money. So,
but I want to point out that right now, all those people have Apple Watches with a little app that every hour tells them to get up and walk around.
Get up and walk around. Yes, absolutely.
I just want to say.
That's funny.
Now we need steps. We need our steps.
Right. Now we need our steps.
Yes. Now I park really far away from the grocery store door, regardless of the cart return, so I can get my steps in.
Steps.
And you don't want to be right next to the cart return either, because then you get too many dings on your car. There's like all kinds of nuance here. Our common sense has shifted a little bit again.
That is exactly right.
We've learned more.
We've learned more. Well, y'all, This has been such a fun topic to unpack with you two. I have just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everybody watching has also enjoyed. But we're at time, so I'm going to say goodbye and see you next month.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.